Welcome to 8-Limb Life, a podcast on living the 8 limbs of yoga, one step at a time. My name is Andra, and I am grateful you are sharing your time and presence with me as we explore this sacred wisdom. These teachings are ancient, but they're not meant to live in the past. They show up in how we speak, how we act, how we relate to others, and to ourselves. Each episode explores one of the limbs and how we can bring this wisdom into modern life. This is 8-Limb Life. Today we're looking at Pranayama, the fourth of the 8 limbs. When we hear the word pranayama, we think of breathing exercises. Maybe you've practiced alternate nostril breathing, or you've counted your breaths, lengthened your exhale, practiced breath retention, or simply been invited by a yoga teacher to slow your breathing down. All of these things are a part of pranayama. But just like with asana, pranayama is much more than a technique. The word itself gives us a clue. Prana is often translated as life force or vital energy, and ayama can mean extension, expansion, regulation, or restraint. So pranayama is understood as the extension or regulation of the life force through the breath. And that gives us a very different way of thinking about breathing. Because breath isn't just something the body does. It is one of the places where body, mind, and energy meet. We can survive without food for a surprisingly long time. But we can't go very long without breathing. The breath is intimately connected to life itself. And because the breath is always happening in the present moment, it also gives us one of the most direct ways to come into relationship with the present. I think one of the most beautiful things about pranayama is that there isn't just one way to work with the breath. The yogic tradition developed many different practices, and each one gives us a slightly different relationship with breath, energy, and awareness. Some practices are invigorating, some are cooling. Some are balancing. Some help us concentrate and others help us release. Some gradually bring us toward stillness. So let's take a moment to look at some of the pranayamas you might encounter in a yoga practice. We won't go deeply into the technique of each one here. Think of this more as an introduction. An invitation to become familiar with the many ways the breath can be explored. I'll include each breathing technique in the show notes, and you can find many examples of these online. You might simply choose the one that resonates with you the most, and then try it in the quiet comfort of your own home. One of the simplest places to begin is with 3-part breath, sometimes called Dirgha Pranayama. Rather than changing the breath dramatically, we begin to experience the breath as something that can move through the lower abdomen, the ribs, and the upper chest. It gives us a sense of the breath as expansive. And it can teach us something important right away. There is more space to breathe than we may have realized. Then there is Ujjayi breath, the breath many of us know from asana practice. The breath moves gently through a narrowed passage in the throat, creating that soft ocean-like sound. Ujjayi breathing gives us something to listen to. The breath becomes an anchor, as though we can hear the sound of the ocean inside of ourselves. And as we move through asana, it can help us maintain a relationship with the breath rather than allowing it to disappear into the background. This becomes a moving meditation. And then there is breath of fire. This is a rapid, rhythmic breath in which the abdomen actively pumps with each exhale, creating a steady, almost fiery rhythm. Breath of fire is especially associated with Kundalini yoga, and traditionally it was used to awaken energy, generate heat, and bring a sense of vitality and alertness to the practice. What's interesting to me about this breath is that it can change our experience of ourselves. We aren't simply breathing differently. We're deliberately changing the quality of our energy. And this gives us another important insight into pranayama. The breath doesn't only respond to our state. We can use the breath to participate in changing our state. Sometimes we need to calm ourselves. Sometimes we need to gather ourselves. And sometimes we need to wake ourselves up, which we can do with breath of fire and our next pranayama, Bhastrika, or bellows breath. Unlike breath of fire, where the exhale is active and the inhale is generally passive, in Bhastrika, we have more of an active inhale and an active exhale. The inhale and exhale are both intentional, creating a vigorous movement of breath. This is an energizing practice. Yoga isn't always asking us to become more relaxed. It's asking us to become more conscious. Sometimes consciousness requires stillness. Sometimes it requires energy. Both Bhastrika and breath of fire can create that energy within us. Next, let's consider lion's breath, which takes us somewhere completely new. We open the mouth, extend the tongue, roll the eyes up and back, and release the breath with an audible exhale. It's playful and expressive, and there can be something wonderfully liberating about it. We spend so much of our lives controlling our expressions, holding things in, making ourselves appropriate. Lion's breath gives us permission to release and to laugh. Sitali breath takes us in yet another direction. The breath is drawn in through a rolled tongue, creating a cooling sensation, and then released through the nose. Traditionally, it is associated with cooling and soothing qualities, and can be a beautiful way to cool down the body at the end of a heated practice. Whether or not we attach a particular physiological effect to it, the experience itself invites us to notice how differently the breath can feel simply by changing the pathway through which we breathe. Then there is Nadi Shodhana, or alternate nostril breathing. We alternate the breath between the two nostrils in a particular pattern. This breath is practiced by using the right thumb to gently close the right nostril and the ring finger to close the left nostril. And then the breath is alternated between each nostril in a steady, relaxed rhythm. And suddenly, something very ordinary, breathing, requires our complete attention. We have to remember where we are in the pattern. We have to slow down, and by doing this, the mind begins to gather itself. This is where pranayama starts to feel very much like a meditation. And now we come to something even more subtle, the pauses between the breaths. This is Kumbhaka, breath retention. There can be a pause after the inhale, a pause after the exhale. And this is where pranayama begins to bring us directly into relationship with the still point. At first, the pause can feel uncomfortable. We want the next breath. We want movement or something to happen. But with practice and when approached appropriately, the pause can become a doorway. Because for just a moment, there is no inhale and no exhale. There is simply awareness. And this is one of the places where pranayama begins to reveal its deeper purpose. We aren't practicing breath retention simply because we want to hold out the breath. We're learning to become comfortable in the space between movements, the space between breaths, the space between thoughts. And then we let it go. After exploring all of these different ways of breathing, we come back to the simplest practice of all. We stop controlling the breath. We let the breath breathe itself. And now we notice it a little differently. The breath isn't something we have to manipulate. It has been carrying us all along. Bhastrika can teach us about energy. Sitali can teach us about cooling and soothing. Lion's breath can teach us about release. And the natural breath teaches us something perhaps even more important. We can let go. We can stop doing. We can simply be here. And the breath continues with no conscious effort at all. Right now, without changing anything, notice that you're breathing. You don't have to deepen the breath. You don't have to make it slower. Just notice. An inhale arrives. An exhale departs. And then another breath comes. The interesting thing about the breath is that most of the time we don't think about it. It happens on its own. The body knows how to breathe. And yet, unlike almost every other function in the body, the breath is something we can consciously influence. You can't simply decide to slow your heartbeat down to 5 beats per minute. But you can decide to slow your breathing. You can lengthen the inhale. You can lengthen the exhale. You might pause between breaths or change their rhythm. The breath sits right at this fascinating threshold between what is conscious and what is unconscious. And yoga has been interested in this threshold for thousands of years. The breath becomes a bridge between the body and the mind, between movement and stillness. I think this is why the placement of pranayama in the 8 limbs really matters. Patanjali placed pranayama immediately after asana. We explored how asana brings us into relationship with the body. We feel the body, we inhabit the body. We learn how to become present to sensation rather than constantly trying to get somewhere else. And then naturally, we begin to notice something else, the breath. The body is moving and the breath is moving with it. As the physical practice becomes quieter, the breath often becomes more noticeable. Eventually, we may come to stillness. And there, sitting in the body, we discover that the breath itself is still moving. Pranayama takes us one step deeper. We are no longer primarily working with the outer shape of the body. We're working with something far more subtle. Think about what happens when you simply lengthen your exhale. You don't have to believe anything. You don't have to think yourself into relaxation. You just change the breath and something begins to shift. This is one of the reasons breath practices can be so powerful. They give us a direct experience of the connection between our inner and outer worlds. We begin to see how I breathe affects how I feel, and how I relate to what I'm feeling affects how I breathe. The breath becomes the teacher. If we are struggling to slow the breath down, what might that tell us? If we are holding on to the breath, we might ask, what are we holding on to? If the breath becomes smoother and quieter, what happens to the mind? These questions can take pranayama far beyond an exercise we do on the mat and into the moments of our everyday lives. If you've practiced with the breath for long enough, you may notice moments when the breath becomes incredibly subtle. There may be a natural pause, not something that's forced, not something you manufacture, just a moment when the movement of the breath becomes very quiet. And in that quiet, something else becomes apparent. The mind doesn't have to be busy. There can be awareness without constant thought. The goal of yoga isn't to destroy the mind. We need it. We need the mind to think, discern, remember, communicate, and make choices. But we can also discover that we don't have to be thinking at every moment. There can be a thoughtless awareness, a clear, awake presence in which the mind is quiet until we call upon it. This is what we call the still point. The breath has been with us every moment of our lives, through every joy, every loss, every beginning and ending. Every moment we felt completely at home in ourselves, and every moment we felt far away from ourselves. The breath never stopped. It kept arriving and departing, arriving and departing. Pranayama begins when we stop taking this miracle for granted, when we become willing to listen, to feel, to participate, and eventually to become quiet enough to hear what the breath has been saying all along. Because beneath the movement of the breath is stillness, and beneath the movement of the mind is awareness. And in that stillness, we may discover something very simple. We are already here. We have been here all along. This is pranayama. Thank you for being here and for exploring these ancient teachings together with me. If this episode resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might need these teachings in their life. Until next time, may your practice continue to unfold, both on and off the mat. Namaste.